Hey boys and girls, teacher Deborah here. I'm so glad that you tuned in. I'm back with our missionary story. You remember last time we talked about John. He had lost his mother and father after the fire, and John had been placed in an orphanage where he lived for a very short time, and then he was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Cook. And so after that, John had to decide if he wanted to change his name or not. So he changed his name to John Westbrook Cook. So now Cook was his last name. So John and his brother Lynn and his family lived in Michigan for a very short time, and then they moved to Florida, Miami, where it was warm, and John and his family loved living there. And then pretty soon, John and Lynn made friends with Ellen Miller, who lived right across them, and they loved playing together. But you know what? John was still missing something. What would that be? John had not believed in Jesus as his Savior. So John, Lynn, and Elmira started going to church on a street bus downtown Miami, where they heard about Jesus, about sin, but John still had not believed in Jesus. After John grew up, he decided, I will not go to church anymore. I'll just have fun with my friends. He thought that by just having fun, that will make him forget all about sin. And yet, John was worried about death, about sin. So it didn't go away. It kept coming to his mind again and again. So John, after he finished school, he started working on big airplanes, and he joined the U.S. Army Force, and he loved doing that. But still, John was missing something very important. He had not believed in Jesus as his Savior. How would he hear? He didn't know how to. And so there is a lady. Her name is called Mrs. Morrison. She loved telling other people about Jesus. She would use tracts like this that tell other people how to believe in Jesus. And so she will hand them out on a city bus. And so one time she handed one to Mrs. Mandy. And so Mrs. Mandy, after reading the tract about Jesus, she believed in Jesus. And she was so excited, and her life changed. And you know what? And then she told her daughter, Ellen Miller, about Jesus. And Ellen Miller also read the tract about Jesus, and she believed in Jesus as her Lord and Savior. And then Ellen Miller was so excited. And so she remembered her friend. Who was her friend? That was John, who lived across them. And so Ellen Miller got her phone and she called. She said, "Hey John, this is Ellen Miller. Do you remember me? I lived right across you. Would you like to get together?" And so they did. And Ellen Miller wanted to tell him about Jesus, and she did. But did John believe? No, he didn't. But I want you to pay attention to something very important. You know, these people, someone told them. So Mrs. Morrison told Mrs. Mandy, and Mrs. Mandy told Miller, her daughter, and then Miller told John. I wonder who told you about Jesus. Did you hear about Jesus in the Good News Club? Or you're hearing about Jesus for the very first time? You know, John and Ellen Miller started going to a youth group that was held by an organization called Youth for Christ, where a lot of young people would go and they will learn about Jesus, about God, and they will sing songs. And John was listening very carefully, because he was still questioning. He still needed answers how to believe in Jesus. And so one time, the director for Youth for Christ, read this verse from Romans 10:9 and 10. And he read, "If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and he's saved." And so he explained to him that he needed to trust, that he needed to believe that Jesus is the Son of God who had died for his sins. That he needed to confess his sin to God. To confess means that to tell God that you're sorry. So he explained that to him. So John believed in Jesus after understanding and believing that Jesus was the Son of God and that Jesus had died for him. He believed in Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And his life started to change. So I wonder how Johnny's life was changing. How did that happen? You need to come back next week and tune in to find out what was happening to John.